F1 will eventually have to give up its hydrocarbon combustion engines. And as much as we love them, that's just a fact, even if we cling on as long as possible with biofuels and sus deals with massive oil oligarchs. At the moment, a lot of people are put off by battery-powered electric power units, but while they are nowhere near ready for the energy consumption needs of an F1 race, their torque and power delivery potential is exciting to consider, even if you are put off by the very different noise. Nonetheless, an alternative to battery power sits in the form of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. And while fuel cells are the current focus of hydrogen power, some people really are gunning for hydrogen combustion engines to power F1 into the future, so we can have that big old noise and the old school power delivery mechanisms we are used to. So let's look at both. First, a quick look at the existing petrol internal combustion engine. I've covered this in detail before, so this will be a super simplified version, and the diagrams in this video are illustrative of the points, but not accurate, so bear that in mind. So petrol is a hydrocarbon, a compound of hydrogen and carbon, which we mix with oxygen, pump into a cylinder and ignite. The heat from the combustion causes a rapid expansion of gases, which drives a piston, which, along with other well-timed pistons, drives a rotation which ultimately drives the rear wheels, powering the car. Through combustion, the hydrocarbon fuel and the oxygen from the air react and recombine into carbon oxides that are expelled into the atmosphere and are generally regarded as bad and a driver of climate change. Hydrogen fuel combustion basically relies on the same process, but instead of petrol or gasoline, we chuck in hydrogen gas. As before, this mixes with oxygen in a combustion chamber in a cylinder, burns, drives pistons that eventually power the car. And from this burning, in an ideal world, we'd just get water, as hydrogen plus oxygen can be smashed together into H2O with the energy from the combustion. But alas, in the real world, the combustion is so hot that it activates the nitrogen in the air, which is drawn into the chemical reaction process, and you end up pumping nitrogen oxides out of the exhaust, which are bad for people's respiratory health and also for the environment. We don't want to be huffing nitrogen oxides out of our engines if we can help it. Now, I should note that petrol engines also release some nitrogen, but I'm just demonstrating that we're not solving our emission problems here, especially as combustion engines also require oils, some of which burn off into carbon oxides anyway. Now, the good thing about hydrogen engines is you can run them super lean, which reduces your NOx outputs, but this comes at a cost of power, though is very efficient. So this is how you would expect nitrogen road cars to be tuned. Now, a lean fuel mix means you increase the amount of air you mix with the fuel before combustion. So while hydrogen burns well mixed with 34 times its own mass in air, it can still burn with an air to fuel ratio of 180 to 1. Now, this is super lean. There's a small amount of fuel in this mix. Compared to petrol, this is massive. Petrol can just about do a 30 to 1 air-fuel mixture under well-engineered circumstances, but normally runs at about half that. So again, a hydrogen engine can be made very efficient, which will reduce the nitrogen oxide emissions at a cost of out-and-out power, which is great for road cars, especially once you bang a catalytic converter on there to muzzle all the NOx at its tracks. We'll come back to this engine in a second, but let's flip over and have a look at fuel cells as an alternate way of using our hydrogen. Now, this is a completely different beast, which I am again going to simplify. Again, we have our big tank of hydrogen gas as a fuel, but we're not going to burn it. So how do we get the energy out of it? Well, first we're going to put the hydrogen through a platinum catalyst, which will split the hydrogen atoms into their nuclei and electrons. So we leave a bunch of positively charged hydrogen nuclei over here, which we're just going to leave here for now, and a bunch of negatively charged electrons, which are going to do all of the work. Electricity, when you pare it down, is just electrons moving through wires. That's all it is. If you can make electrons move, you've got electrical power, which you can put to work. So now we send all these electrons to a power control unit, which does a job we're used to seeing in our hybrid and F1 cars. It either sends electrons as electric current to a motor, which will drive the wheels just like any electric motor, or you can send the charge to a battery, which will store energy for later deployment. So what you have here is a normal motor generator ERS type system. You could drive energy to the wheels to power the car, or you could take energy out of the wheels to charge the battery. Normal energy recovery regen stuff. The electrons do circuit back to the fuel cell and recombine with both the hydrogen nuclei and some oxygen supplied from the air to form H2O, just water as a byproduct. No catch here, just water this time, clean and done. Now this system is very similar to battery-powered electric vehicles. You're just generating the electrical current by stripping down hydrogen atoms instead of pulling it from a battery. So in the end, you'll still end up with a whooshy, screamy, electro-futuristic noise like Formula E cars make because you've got the same motor generator at the driving end of the car. Some people don't like that. So you might say, okay, let's use the hydrogen combustion engine then. It's loud and scary in the way F1s should be, like the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. But hang on. The NOx emissions from this engine are still an issue, and not one we can really dial down by running lean, as we want that power, right? Flat out racing is the aim, if not always what we see right now. But emissions are just one problem to solve. Burning hydrogen in these engines brings in a lot of its own engineering problem. When you combust petrol, in terms of the space taken up, the volume, you only need a tiny bit of it in the chamber compared to the air, because petrol is a liquid and therefore much denser than air. So while the ratio of air to petrol is going to be about 15:1, 15 grams of air for every gram of petrol, the petrol takes up about 100 times less space than the air. Meanwhile, in the hydrogen engine, in order to mix with air at the right ratio, the hydrogen has to take up about a third of the space, because it's still a gas, and the least dense gas at that. So in the same space, you are much more limited in how much hydrogen you can burn compared to the petrol fuel. So a hydrogen engine is now quite underpowered compared to the petrol equivalent, potentially by quite a lot. And the more you compensate to try and bring this power up, the more you up your nitrogen oxide emissions, and the more you make your engine more complicated and less robust as you further expose yourself to the other problems with hydrogen burning, mainly around thermal management. Now, hydrogen ignites spontaneously at much lower energy levels than petrol, so can much more easily combust at either the wrong time in the cylinder, which reduces power and potentially causes damage, or could even ignite in the wrong part of the engine, causing wear, damage, or even some dangerous, more explosive situations. Controlling where your hydrogen can get to is vitally important, as it can escape into the wrong places much more easily than liquid fuel. But the real kicker in all of this is efficiency. The hydrogen in your tank has a certain amount of stored energy. It's impossible to convert all of this into useful work, into driving the car, so we measure how much we do manage to use as efficiency. Now, a hydrogen engine on its own is about 25% efficient. Of all the energy available in the hydrogen fuel, only about 25% of it goes into turning the rear wheels once it's gone through the whole powertrain. In hydrogen fuel cells, this jumps to 50%. We can squeeze twice as much energy out of this hydrogen than we could by burning it. This means we can have fuel tanks half the size, which is a huge benefit as hydrogen takes up a lot of space. It also means we spend half as much on buying the hydrogen in the first place, and hydrogen is expensive. It's expensive to make, it's tricky to store, and it's hard to transport. With all that in mind, why on earth would you waste your precious hydrogen on a power unit that essentially wastes half of it compared to fuel cells? Fuel cell power units are cleaner, more efficient, cheaper to run, and have energy regeneration built right in there for added efficiency and flexibility. So now let's think about hydrogen overall. There are still some serious issues with hydrogen for this kind of thing, and we have just touched on some of them. Storage and transport are big problems, and we're still working hard on this. We can liquefy it, which requires absurdly robust dewars dropped to incredibly low temperatures. Very expensive, and we don't have a lot of those. We can keep it as a gas, but compress it to about 300 times less space than it takes up in the air. This is how it's stored inside the cars as fuel, but this does require robust, well-tested containers to prevent accidents. Alternatively, we can chemically store it, which means locking it inside a chemical compound and then just breaking it out later, which has yet to be perfected in a way that makes large-scale practical sense, and it is less efficient. But they are working on it. So at this point, as the back end of a fuel cell powertrain is essentially the same as a battery-powered powertrain, what advantages does it have over the Formula E way? Well, while hydrogen currently struggles in terms of size, that stored hydrogen gas tank takes up a lot of space, it might beat it in terms of weight. Batteries are still very, very heavy for their energy storage, and hydrogen has them beat by a factor of 10 to 1 for joules per kilogram. Also, you could argue that a hydrogen tank is technically refuelable, though pit stops would probably take in the range of minutes, not seconds, if you did want to shrink the tank down and go that route. Now, this could lead to races taking a wonderfully bizarre new shape, with cars battling for the lead 2 or 3 laps apart at some periods of the race. At the moment, creating batteries for electric cars is quite an energy-intensive process and also requires mining for minerals like lithium needed in its composition. This is not a super environmentally robust part of its life cycle. Now, the huge majority of hydrogen manufactured today is also incredibly environmentally unfriendly. It's stripped out of methane via cracking, which results in CO2 emissions and involves huge energy losses in the process, so that's bad. But you can make hydrogen very cleanly through electrolysis. We just don't have a lot of large-scale infrastructure up and running for that yet, but we could. So let's come back to efficiency. Lithium-ion batteries at their current best level only lose about 17% of the energy you put in them through inefficiencies in charging and discharging. A hydrogen fuel cell only gains you back about 50% of the energy you put into harvesting the hydrogen in the first place. At present, with the way technology looks to develop and seeing what it's suited to, battery-powered electric powertrains still look set to be the future driver of motorsport, though I continue to watch the intense development of future tech with eager eyes.